Shalom and welcome to this week's edition of the Middle East Report. In this programme today we shall be unpacking President Donald Trump's threats against Hamas that all the hostages should be released by 12 noon on Saturday, and we'll also be discussing what does the future of Gaza hold. And in this programme today I'm joined by two special guests. I'm joined by my good friend Sharon Klaff from Campaign for Truth and Robert Harris from Voice for Justice. So warm welcome to both of you for an action-packed programme. Great to see you back on the programme, Sharon, and thank you for wanting to do a programme to talk about the future of Gaza, but of course what we're seeing so quickly is a very fast moving developments when it comes to the war in Gaza, the ceasefire, the hostage crisis. But before we actually unpack the threats made by President Donald Trump to Hamas, that they have a deadline to release the hostages by 12 p.m. On Saturday, or all hell breaks loose. What that means, we don't really know, and we're all intrigued to find out what that's going to mean. But in the meantime, do you want to just unpack what we're seeing today in Britain and in the West, and this pandemic of Jew hatred has now become so rampant it looks like it's totally out of control? And how does that affect you, your family and your community?
Okay, so we've spoken about this before, and you know that my history is following anti-Semitism and its effect on Jewish people, particularly in the diaspora. It's got worse, we know that. I recently met a student from California who's come to St. Martin's Art School, and she was saying she's got no friends. She's a Jewish girl, she's got no friends. Most of the people there are pro-Palestinian, wearing the badges, wearing the colour, the brand colour. And she was a young girl and not knowing what to do. And I'm hearing also from my friends whose grandchildren are at university feeling the same thing. They have no friends at university. They have nobody to talk to. As for myself, obviously I know it's there. I feel stifled. I feel as though somebody's throttling me with this sort of air that's coming our way all the time. It's blowing our way. Not sure what this government's going to do about it. I don't think they understand it. And that's how it feels to be a Jew in the diaspora now.
And Robert, it's great to have you back on the Middle East Report. And can I thank you for all the diligent research that you do with any programme that you're on with me on Revelation TV. So it's an absolute honour to have you on the Middle East Report, and thank you for you and the excellent team at Voice for Justice UK for what you do for defending Christian freedoms in Parliament. But can you give your perspective as a Christian on what is this unprecedented hatred of the Jewish people that we're being seen manifest in our media and our culture in British society today?
I think one of the first things I think about is the police and how they are responding to the open hatred on the streets of London, especially when they have these pro-Palestine demonstrations, which I think more correctly should be described as hate marches. I mean, I don't doubt that there are some genuine people on the marches, but I think they're incredibly naive. They don't really know what this is about. I think the average police officer, I've thought very carefully about this, the average police officer, we shouldn't condemn the average police officer. I think they're putting themselves in harm's way in all sorts of situations on a daily basis, and they are doing their best. There's always bad apples, yes. But I think the very senior people, the Met Commissioner, the Home Secretary, the Mayor of London, they all have legal duties in relation to police powers and how they are exercised in individual circumstances. And I think there are huge questions they have to answer. They are accountable jointly in their respective roles, and I think there's been a terrible loss of moral leadership in this country. I think about Gideon Falter, who's a well-known campaigner against anti-Semitism. We all heard that story a number of months ago where he was on the streets of London walking peacefully. It wasn't too far from a pro-Palestine march. He had his head covered, and the police officer said to him, he advised him, I think was the language that the police later used, that he shouldn't be openly Jewish. Now, that is so shocking to think that that can be said in modern day Britain. If that had been said to, for example, a Muslim individual whose attire was indicative of their Muslim faith, or a transgender individual. If that had been said, there would be a string of resignations, it would be a national scandal, you would not hear the end of it. There would be a public inquiry, there would be huge condemnation at every level of the British government. However, when it came to this situation, there was a kind of weak apology that came from the police, which was absolutely disgraceful. You are getting parts of London that are effectively no-go areas for Jews, and yet we live in a country which prides itself on honouring so-called diversity and inclusion, which is a very, when you really analyse it properly, it can become a very toxic doctrine that's very dishonest because it doesn't respect all people. It respects only certain people. You know, a few months ago, I was in East London. I had to go to St Mary's University to see somebody. And there was a big cordon of security guards who didn't let you in unless you gave a reason why you were there. And I struggled to get through. I eventually got through. But the grounds in front of the university building were covered with these pro-Palestine demonstrators in their tents, shouting violently and aggressively. And I saw on the opposite side of the road police officers sitting in their vans doing nothing. I felt utterly disgusted. It was very unsettling to think that I was being put to the bother of trying to get into the university when I was told actually normally they don't have security people. You can just walk into the department and see who you need to see. But on that occasion, they had to protect the university. So I was being put at a disadvantage and the police were accommodating that. So we are facing an extraordinary situation in this country where hate towards the Jewish people, it's being openly tolerated. I hear some people say who are watching this programme, they must be saying to themselves, oh, but hold on a minute, there are people being arrested at these marches, aren't there? Yes, a very few. They're tokenistic arrests. I'm very encouraged by what I'm seeing in the United States with this new Trump administration as far as this is concerned, because if you look at the executive orders that he has signed, there's one in particular which actually builds upon an earlier executive order that he signed in his first term, which was effectively ignored by Biden. And that is all about taking huge, serious, concrete action against anti-Semitism at every single level. So he's ordered the Department of Justice, the Department of Education to take very, very serious steps and report back to him within 2 months about what they're doing. I've got a fantastic, very brief quote that I'd like to read to you, which is so relevant. So on February the 4th, the Associated Press quoted an official who is the Department of Education Acting Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights. And he said this: today, the department, that's the Department of Education, is putting universities, colleges and K-12 schools on notice. This administration will not tolerate continued institutional indifference to the well-being of Jewish students on American campuses. Now, Trump has also threatened that he's going to withdraw federal funds to universities who do not get their act together and fight anti-Semitism. Now, I believe these are not just harsh words. I believe he will do something. He's not just somebody who makes threats. He means what he says. And, you know, he is the best friend that Israel has ever had in the Oval Office. And there have been some good presidents as far as Israel is concerned, but no one remotely compares with Trump and his administration.
It's excellent, Robert. That's been building up for a while, I can tell. And let's have a look now at this excellent CBN news report by our good friend Dale Hurd, who's actually reporting on the rise of Jew hatred here in the UK.
This is the United Kingdom that British Jews experience today.
Zionists, they are filthy animals.
Like obedient sheep, you obey Israel.
The whole condemning Hamas, I'm not going to condemn them, and Israel doesn't exist.
Most British Jews now no longer believe they have a future here. Recent polling has also found that most Jews hide their Jewishness in public and do not feel welcome in the United Kingdom. Gideon Falter is chief executive of Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, which commissioned the poll and has been documenting the rising Jew hatred.
A lot of people have talked about whether they have a future in this country. Do I think the Jewish community in the UK is going to evaporate? No. But I do think there is a sizable conversation now happening within the community of people saying, okay, is this the place that we've got a future?
There were nearly 2,000 anti-Semitic incidents reported in the first half of 2024, the highest number ever recorded for a 6-month period. 9 out of 10 British Jews say the government is not doing enough to stop the violence and discrimination.
I know some who have left. I know some who are actively, seriously looking at leaving.
Jewish investigative journalist David Collier tells us he constantly feels the anti-Jewish hate.
I get death threats every single day, but I'm also being contacted by Jews either who are having trouble at work, at home, students.
What brings you both out here today?
Well, just the amount of anti-Semitism we've had in Oxford for the past year has been really awful. We've had swastikas, we've had Jews being accused of weaponising anti-Semitism.
We've been told we're not welcome at the university.
Yeah, and it just...
down the streets.
It's been escalating, and this is the big message, it's about the escalation, you know, it's getting gradually worse.
This in a nation where the adopted national song is Jerusalem. In the song Jerusalem, the British sing, "We will not cease till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land." But this Judeo-Christian connection that goes back centuries has begun to fray. Surveys show British Jews consider Islamists to be the most serious threat. And in a close second is the far left. Falter adds the nation's young people are being indoctrinated against Jews.
They are becoming radicalized on the internet. They are imbibing bigotries that their parents themselves don't have. And then they're teaching this from one kid to another kid. We've got a generation which is extremely hateful. And not just hateful, they're extremists.
Some non-Jews have seen the danger and are publicly supporting Britain's Jews. Mark Burbeck began the group Our Fight after he witnessed the lack of public support for Jews in Israel following the October 7th massacre.
Shock at the lack of empathy that people had for the Israeli people, the Jewish people, after October the 7th. In that period, a few of us were going to these vigils that were being organised by the Israeli community, and we sort of thought, we need to do something.
Another group supporting Britain's Jews is Christian Action Against Anti-Semitism, led by pastors Tim and Haley Gutman.
Our heart was to do something publicly that showed the Jewish people we stand with them, we love them, we're with them in solidarity. They're not alone, especially amidst this rising anti-Semitism.
David Collier is afraid demographics have already decided the future course of Britain's Jews. The most popular name for baby boys in Britain today is Mohammed.
It's a completely different country. The entire dynamic has changed, the entire atmosphere has changed, both towards Israel and in extension towards the Jewish community. It's completely different. It's a different country with a different demographic, a different outlook. Everything about it is different. You're talking to these Jewish people, and you know that things are only going to get worse for them, not better. There's no way back for the United Kingdom from this point. As far as I see it, no way back.
Falter has decided to stand and fight for the future, with the hope that more non-Jews will join him.
I think a lot of people don't realize how anti-Semitism relates to them, but they don't see it as something that's going to actually hit home, hit them. Whatever happens with anti-Semitism in this country, if extremism continues to surge in the way that it is now, this country's in for dark days, and so is the West.
Dale Hurd, CBN News, London.
Outstanding report there put together by Dale Hurd from CBN, and good to see that the Americans really do care about this country and the rise of Jew hatred, and if they do, we should do as well. Robert, you wanted to particularly comment on some of the CCTV footage we saw in that excellent report by Dale Hurd for CBN, where we saw that ultra-Orthodox Jews, or Hasidim, were being attacked on the streets of London?
Well, it triggered a memory for me. I met and interviewed a very elderly lady in her 90s who's now no longer with us. She worked in British intelligence during the Second World War. As a teenager, she went out to Germany with her father in the 1930s. It was about 35, 36. He was a Reuters war correspondent. He was there to interview, believe it or not. Her memory was a bit fading. She said it was either Göring or Goebbels, one of those two. And she remembers sitting in a car with her father during that trip. And she said to her father, "What is going on over there, Daddy?" She saw a man being beaten up on the street. And her father explained to her, that is a Jewish person and this is what is normal. This is what's going on now in Germany. And that never left her mind. She was in her late 90s when she told me that story. And it seared itself into her memory. And just hearing that, I mean, you know, I've just heard that story. I wasn't there. But to imagine what was going on then, and then you see these images now of what's going on in London, in a country that is supposed to have human rights protections for everybody. This is unthinkable. It's unconscionable that certain groups of people, like the Jewish people, are not being given those rightful protections by the police and all the other authorities. So it just unsettled me when I saw those images, and it brought back those memory.
And Sharon, just share with us your thoughts on that. I don't think words can describe how horrific Kanye West advert was at the Super Bowl, which attracts the biggest TV audience in America to advertise his clothing range, and then find out that this was advertising a t-shirt to buy. It's a white t-shirt with a black swastika on it. Share with your thoughts on how vile and disgusting this is, and think that this can actually happen in 2025. It feels like Nazi Germany all over again.
So I think Kanye West is not a very well person, and I think that's well known. He's bipolar, and I think that he acts on that. Is he an anti-Semite? He says he's an anti-Semite. He says he hates Jews. Why they let him show it, I have no idea. Why he was allowed to use such a huge American platform to show it. I think in a way, the fact that he's overt about it, the fact that he speaks about it, we know who he is and we can deal with him. It's the people who don't speak about what they do. It's the people who hide behind their masks that you saw on your screen when they put this whole niqab on and you can't see who they are. And nobody arrests them, nobody does anything to them. I'm hoping that the public who saw what Kanye West advertised will see who he is, will discount him. And I think in the Trump era, with President Trump being so aware of what's going on, I think certainly the people in America will discount Kanye West, and I think we'll begin to see the end of him. He'll no longer be the great celebrity that he thinks he is. I just would like to address something, though, that was said earlier about anti-Semitism. We hear a lot about protecting Jews, looking after Jews, giving Jews security, etc., etc. And although I appreciate that, and obviously it's necessary if somebody gets attacked, I'm kind of wondering why Jews need to be protected and not be seen as members of society, equal members of society. And I think in a way, anti-Semitism separates us from society, and so does the idea that we need to be a protected species. So I'm hoping that the people who are with us will rethink this idea of protecting Jews, but rather working towards educating the anti-Semitic population and even the population who are unaware of anti-Semitism, that all people in society should be equal and have equal rights, and that we should work towards a situation where nobody needs to be particularly protected because of their ethnicity, but protected against crime, protected against being beaten up in the streets, protected against their houses being burgled, be they Jewish, be they Christian, be they Muslim, whoever they are. And this is, I'm pleased that you've given me the opportunity to say this, because it's always something that bothers me, that we should be a protected society. Our schools should have fences around them. We should have a particular group of people called the CST to protect us. Every time we have a bar mitzvah or wedding or any celebration, we have to call in protection people. You can't go through the door. You were horrified about going through into a university and being inspected. Every time I go to a function in a synagogue or a hall, my grandson had a bar mitzvah recently. At the door is a security man. He's got a list of names. You can't get through the door unless you're on his list. I'm tired of living like that. I would like to live in a society where I feel like you. I feel free. I can walk around and just be a human being.
But that's, even for Christians, that's very difficult in this country now.
Yes,
so
I agree with you.
Because the Christians are being attacked as well as being marginalised because we don't hold to the liberal progressive viewpoint that our government is advocating and our civil service is advocating. So again,
Simon, can I just interrupt you there? I think what's happening to Christians and Jews at this very moment is DEI, critical race theory, is globalization. But if I take Jews out of that, what's happened to Jews through the millennia is something different.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, and there will come a time with President Trump leading the way to saying no more the two genders, no more DEI. I think that's going to infiltrate into Western society. But I think, is that going to put Jews on an equal footing with everybody else?
Well, I don't think Jewish people are equal, because of the amount of blessing that they give to our nation in terms of its economy, in terms of the creativity of this nation, in terms of the intelligence, in terms of giving to kind of UK charities. So the Jewish community plays more than a patriotic role in this country. You only have to go to a synagogue where you see the British flag, you see the royal anthem or the national anthem being played to honour to the king. So yeah, I think your community speaks for itself. It does need protection, sadly, because of those that hate your community. But the contribution made to your community to British society is immense. And Robert, share with us the Christian response to this rapid and rising Jew hatred that we're seeing today.
Well, I think it's a good place to start in terms of what the Bible has to say about Israel. God says in Genesis 12:3, I think it is, those who bless Israel will be blessed.
Genesis 12:1-3.
Thanks for the correction.
I know some of our smart viewers will pick that up, so I had to do that.
Thanks for correcting me. So essentially it says, when God says that those who bless Israel will be blessed, those who curse Israel will be cursed. Now, my sort of observation of the Christian world and how people see Israel, those who have the more progressive values and also call themselves Christians generally hate Israel, sadly. And those who have conservative beliefs, who believe in the Bible as something you can't edit to your own whims, they take it absolutely seriously and they say, yes, Israel belongs to the Jews because God gave it to them. Absolutely. There's no further discussion about it. So I think it's about authority. This is all about authority. If a Christian believes the Bible is the authority of God, God speaking to man, both Old and New Testament, then it's very, very clear, certainly in the Old Testament, it's abundantly clear that the Holy Land is for the Jews because God gave it to them. It's very simple.
Very simple. And very well put as well. Sharon, give us your perspective on a Daily Telegraph story that was published this week, that Palestinian migrants have been granted the right to live in the UK after applying through a scheme meant for Ukrainian refugees, and a family of 6 are seeking to flee Gaza because they want to join their brother here in the UK, and this is what an immigration judge has now ruled, which has created panic in Westminster. Okay,
so the first thing is that the people in Gaza are called Gazans. They're not called Palestinians. And you know how I feel about that, because there are no such people as a Palestinian. They're a creation. And they're a creation just the same as all the states that were created at the breakup after the Second World War, basically, when they all came into
First World War.
First World War started. And so we had Kuwait and Iraq and et cetera, and we had Pakistan created then as well. And there was no Palestine after that. The Palestine Mandate broke up. So, and in those days, in 1948, the Palestinian people who call themselves Palestinians were called Arabs. They weren't called Palestinians. So this whole idea of Palestine as the media talking about, they use the word.
Can I correct you there? It was the Jews that were called the
Jews were called the Palestine, yes. Yeah. But that disappeared, just like they're no longer Rhodesians, and we've had this chat before. So that's my first point about that. Should they be coming to the UK? Definitely not. They're not Ukrainians. I think that the war in Gaza is very different to the Ukrainian war. And I think that we all know that it was started because Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, but also the governing body of Gaza, invaded Israel. In Gaza, the people are indoctrinated. You see video after video of young children being told to hate the Jews, kill the Jews, etc., etc. I think those people need to be de-radicalized, and I think they need to be housed in the Middle East. And I think on this point, I'll go along with President Trump and his view that Egypt, and he says Jordan, need to be opened and a place created for them to be housed in safety, to look after them, and then to de-radicalize them. And you know that I believe this because I will tell you again that I wrote this a year ago, and I sent you my document, and I sent it to somebody in Israel, that Gaza should be cleared of anybody living there because it's a rubble. It needs to be reconstructed, and that the people in the meantime should not be allowed to collect in a tent city, because if they live in tents, we have another refugee problem. So they need to go to a place in the Sinai, there's plenty of space there, and they need to have homes built for them, and they need to live there for the 10 or 20 years it's going to take to deal with that. So definitely not. They should not come to the West. We have enough people coming from countries that produce terrorists coming into the West and causing problems like Manchester, like Westminster and so on. So definitely not.
Yeah. And Robert, share with us your thoughts on how on the lawyers for the Home Office fear that this ruling could open the floodgates for those in conflict zones like Gaza with their families in the UK to settle here, and also knowing the kind of mindset of those in Gaza being indoctrinated with that hate-filled ideology that is Hamas and that Islamic jihad mentality to come here. Surely that poses also a direct threat to British national security.
It's a very serious threat. What comes to mind when you ask this question is what Tom Homan in the United States said recently. He is the border czar for the Trump administration. And as you will know, President Trump signed an executive order declaring a state of emergency, national emergency at the southern border. Now, Tom Homan said recently that where you have people coming into a country and there's no controls, there's no checks, you don't have any national security anymore. It's finished. And he was referring, of course, to the Joe Biden period. Let's think about the UK context. We have thousands and thousands of people coming into this country illegally. We don't know where they're from often. We don't know, no proper checks have been done. Many of them are just mingling in society with fake identities, working on the black market. No one is really taking control. No government has yet taken control of this. And I think one of the serious obstacles, sadly, I say this with great sadness, has been the European Convention on Human Rights, which, you know, the text itself is actually a very good text, but it's been misused and weaponized by certain judges so that people who are a threat to this country have their human rights protected because they cannot be sent back to the country of their origin. Because they themselves would be under threat. So we have to keep them here, even though they are a threat to us. So there's something very seriously wrong at the heart of this. Thousands of people, hundreds of thousands, who potentially have an ideology that is in conflict with our Western culture. It cannot continue like this. Both governments, the Conservatives and the Labour, have not taken control of this. There were some attempts by certain politicians like Suella Braverman to change the narrative and shift the narrative, but it didn't really go very far because the will of Parliament is simply not, there's no appetite to change anything. So I think the national security of the United Kingdom is actually not something the government is taking very seriously. That's my conclusion.
Yeah, well, thank you for your analysis on that one. And Sharon, what was your first impression when you saw the TV news footage of the release of Ohad Ben-Ami, who was 56, Eli Sharabi, who's 52, and a 34-year-old Or Levy, who were released by Hamas last Saturday?
Well, I cried. I cried because I recognised those faces. I recognised the faces of people that I knew, that I grew up with, who had come out of the camps. And I could see the eyes, I could see the cheekbones, I could see the gauntness, the fact that their mouths looked too big for their bodies. And I cried because I thought, here's the Holocaust. What's happening in Gaza is exactly what was happening in Europe when the world was ignoring it. And the world is still ignoring it. The world is still not seeing what was going on. They're still looking at Gaza as a place that they can rehabilitate, that they can make it again into some sort of state for the Arabs to live there and continue to be a threat, continue to wish to kill Jews. You know that I've spent my life trying to understand how a country like Germany could have created industrial murder of 6 million Jews under the noses of the rest of the world. And here we have, again, in Gaza, a country like Iran financing the killing of Jews under the noses of the West, who are tolerating protests on the street for Hamas, who are tolerating attacks on Jews. When they have those protests, they arrest the Jews, they don't arrest the people protesting against the Jews. And I can only say that we need to harness a country to stand up and tell our government, Keir Starmer needs to take those designer glasses off, and he needs to see what he's doing and how he's destroying this country, because ultimately the Jews are just going to leave and Israel will destroy Hamas. You saw it in Bibi Netanyahu's face the other day when the ultimatum came out. The hostage is out by Saturday or else, and I think we're going to see or else on Saturday.
Yeah. And Robert, do you believe that veneer of deception that Hamas has deployed is actually now coming off, and that people are seeing the real evil that is behind Hamas, and particularly the treatment of the Israeli hostages, which was said very well by Jake Wallace-Simons, writing for the Daily Telegraph. He's also the editor of the Jewish Chronicle, and he says this, that they've been hung upside down, burnt, gagged to the point of suffocation, and starved, all while being taught and mocked as they had to learn to walk again.
I'm reminded about the disgusting language that the BBC uses, and they describe these Hamas people, if you can call them people, as gunmen. They are savages. Savages, terrorists, what can you call them? When I saw those pictures, like Sharon was saying, I just thought, you could see the deep suffering on the faces of these individuals and the unspeakable horrors that they have gone through. And I suspect some of these stories will come out into the public eye over the coming months when they perhaps feel comfortable enough to speak to trusted individuals. I think this sort of footage of the people who are being released will wake up some people who perhaps were in a slumberous state previously, who perhaps didn't really believe it was as bad as they were told it was. I think there are others, sadly, who are feeding on hate material online, hateful conspiratorial rhetoric online, and they are closing their eyes willingly, and they want to believe the narratives that validate their own hate. So I don't think it's going to change everyone. Sadly, that's the reality of human nature. Some people choose to be in darkness. Others are willing to acknowledge the facts when they are presented. I'm also reminded of what Trump said at the press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu. He said that some people are denying October the 7th happened. Sadly, that is true. And he drew a comparison with Holocaust deniers. And I think that's absolutely spot on. The people who say the Holocaust never happened, despite the overwhelming amount of historical evidence that it did happen, and the millions of people who survived, who speak about their testimonies to show that what the Nazis did happen, there are some people who still close their ears and they want to believe their own delusions, illusions and lies. But I think for many, this will be a wake-up call.
Excellent, thank you. And Sharon, what do you make of what President Trump has said in righteous anger after seeing the TV footage of these poor men who were Jewish men who were released by Hamas last Saturday. And he said this, as far as I am concerned, if the hostages aren't returned by Saturday, 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time, I would say, cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out.
Okay, so we need to ask President Trump what he meant by all hell breaking out. There's a kind of problem here because Hamas reportedly said that Israel broke the ceasefire and therefore they're not releasing these hostages. I kind of think that the reason they're not releasing the hostages is because they're actually in a worse condition than the 3 who came out last week, and they have seen the world didn't have sympathy with them for the first time. Many people in the world reacted against them, including the American government. I'm not sure what Keir Starmer said. I don't recall hearing much about what he said. So, and I think Hamas took note of that their propaganda wasn't building support for them anymore. It kind of stalled. And I think they now want more time to fatten up the people they've been trying to starve. All hell break loose. I can't see that America's going to get involved in a war. I think they're going to allow Israel and supply Israel with whatever they need. How Israel's going to deal with it, because there's still hostages there. So, but I'm sure that the IDF and Netanyahu understand what they've got to do, and I'm sure they will go back in there. And in the meantime, we've got President Trump in the background telling Egypt, telling Jordan that he's giving them an offer they can't refuse, and they're going to have to house those people. And Israel hopefully will destroy Hamas.
Absolutely. My own interpretation is I think he's going to put huge pressure on the Qatari government.
I agree with you.
And that is the way that he can then put pressure on Hamas.
I agree with you.
And whether that's economic sanctions or whether that is targeting Hamas leaders in Doha, that remains to be seen. But that obviously is some of the measures that him and his team will be thinking about. So let's have a look at this CBN news report. They actually report President Donald Trump threatening Hamas that they have a deadline of 12 p.m. on Saturday, not to release some hostages, but to release all the Israeli hostages in their captivity.
Speaking to reporters in the Oval Office Monday, President Trump delivered a clear message about the ceasefire and hostage deal.
That's Israel's decision, but as far as I'm concerned, if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off, and let hell break out. All of them, not in drips and drabs, not 2 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 2.
Trump condemned the terror group for its treatment of the hostages, referring to the 3 freed on Saturday who appeared nearly starved.
It looked like something out of the 1930s. It's an absolute disgrace. And I think they saw the way the world viewed it, and they're looking for a reason not to send more.
He also issued a warning to Hamas, suggesting consequences if the hostages are not released.
You'll find out, and they'll find out too. Hamas will find out what I mean. These are sick people, and they'll find out what I mean Saturday at 12 o'clock.
Trump's warnings came after Hamas announced it would not release any captives this coming Saturday. The terror group blamed Israel for allegedly violating the ceasefire. In a statement, Hamas accused Israel of delaying the return of people to northern Gaza, targeting civilians, and failing to deliver agreed-upon relief supplies. Families of the remaining hostages expressed deep concern over the delays.
I really hope it's just like power games, and with the help of the negotiations, we'll be able to agree about what is the problem and solve it. And we will be able to see more hostages getting released on coming Saturday.
The hostages are in a clear and present danger. Their lives are at risk. We saw the horror pictures of the released hostages. Those who are still in there may be in worse conditions. They simply don't have time.
Meanwhile, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is convening a security cabinet meeting to determine its next course of action. The Israeli Defense Ministry has ordered the military to prepare for any possible scenario in the Gaza Strip. Israeli Defense Minister Katz condemned Hamas's move as a complete violation of the Gaza ceasefire and hostage release deal, and ordered the IDF to be at the highest level of readiness.
So the world is waiting to see what President Donald Trump will do if the hostages are not returned on Saturday at 12 p.m, knowing that he's put his presidency on the line and his presidential authority. So let's wait and see what happens. Robert, on those things, we know that, for example, for a president to say this, and this is strong rhetoric, it's almost like he's declaring war on Hamas if they don't release the remaining hostages by 12 p.m. on Saturday, which is the day after this recording. He knows that his presidency is on the line, his authority is on the line, and we saw the danger of President Obama doing this in 2013 in Syria, whereby the Assad's regime used chemical weapons on their opponents and said that this was a red line for America and there'll be consequences. In the end, he did nothing, and it really destroyed his presidential authority. Share with us from a president's perspective how Trump now has to follow up these words with action, but the big question is, what will that actually mean? All hell on Hamas.
Well, part of the answer in the background is already known, if I can put it that way. Under Biden, there was, a de facto partial arms embargo on Israel. We know that. Trump has lifted that, which gives renewed confidence to Israel that it can get on with the job to destroy Hamas. Now, it's clear from all the things that have been said by the Trump administration and Trump himself that they don't want to put boots on the ground. I think that's not going to be an option. The question is, what are the other options? And I think you earlier cited the possibility of Qatar being threatened with sanctions. I think that's a possibility. I mean, he uses sanctions or tariffs in many, many different contexts to get his own way. And so far, a lot of it seems to be working very successfully. So it wouldn't surprise me that he starts off with the economic attack rather than anything military. So beyond that, I don't think I can say very much else, because it's a very fraught situation. And yeah, boots are not going to be on the ground.
Unless he sends airstrikes into Gaza or he fires American cruise missiles at certain locations in Gaza.
Or he just may target more individuals who are part of the Hamas operation, who are in different countries, and target them and those who are next to them, alongside them, with freezing of assets and so on. I think he's going to use the economic route initially, but who knows? Maybe we will be very surprised, because it's a moment that there's a lot of tension in the build-up to Saturday. Maybe we're all going to be taken by surprise.
Absolutely. And Sharon, give us your thoughts on what the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said, and this is his threat to Hamas. If Hamas does not return our hostages by Saturday noon, the ceasefire will end and the IDF will return to intense fighting until Hamas is destroyed.
Well, I think he means that. And I think Israel has shown that when they say they're going to go in, they go in and they do what they need to do. So I think he means that the Israeli army now has, in the ceasefire, I would imagine, has renewed all the equipment they need to renew. They've received shipments from America of weaponry that, as President Trump said, they'd paid for, and therefore he sent it. So I think he means it, and I think Israel will go back in there. I think that it's possible that the hostages have come out, have given them further information as to where the other hostages are. If they got information about a hostage being caged and chained and so on, I would imagine they've been able to give them some idea of where they are, so that they'll be able to either go in and rescue them or avoid those areas when they're dealing with Hamas. So I think that's a key. Just to get back to this idea of what President Trump meant, all hell will break loose, I think that he's a man who keeps his word. He's not Obama. He doesn't draw red lines and not meet them.
Exactly.
That's the first thing. The second thing, he knows that the regime in Iran has to change, even though he said, I'm not in it for regime change. So will he launch something Iran's way? But that doesn't cover the immediacy of the hostages. So I think he will perhaps do something with Iran. Maybe Israel will fly over and destroy some things. Maybe there's something on the ground, some infiltrators who will go there. But I think also, as you said, he's going to deal with Qatar, and he's also going to give Israel a carte blanche to go in there and do what Israel can do, bearing in mind that Israel doesn't indiscriminately kill people.
Absolutely. And Robert, share with us your thoughts of how Hamas have a new equation to deal with. When Biden and Harris were occupying the White House, they were very much putting huge amounts of political pressure on the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to go into Rafah. Now we have Trump in power, who believes in strength through peace, not strength through weakness, as we saw with the Biden administration, and how Hamas are dealing with the world's most powerful political and military force, and now he has them in his sights.
I think it's peace through strength. It's that way around.
Peace through strength, absolutely.
And Trump mentions this quite often. Whatever we think of Donald Trump, the person, or I don't want to get into that. This conversation is about, I'm just thinking about our listeners, because people often talk about personalities. They like this one, they don't like this one. We're talking about policy.
Exactly.
So what I'm thinking is that under the current administration, America does show strength on the international stage. It didn't show strength, sadly, under Joe Biden. The humiliating departure from Afghanistan was a message to America's enemies that they have become a laughingstock. And of course, Joe Biden did release the millions and millions of dollars to Iran. It was claimed that that money was not going to the wrong ends, such as terrorism, but we will not know. But what we do know is that it helped to embolden Iran. And Trump often says that October the 7th wouldn't have happened had he been president. I don't know that for sure, but I do know that the chances are that it probably wouldn't have happened. Or let's put it this way, they would have got so much more support, Israel, since October 2023 from America. And as Sharon said, they paid for this equipment. Israel isn't getting this for free, this military aid. This military equipment is paid for. It's part of an agreement that is agreed every 10 years between the US and Israel. So I think at the moment, Iran needs to be worried that there's someone in the White House who is not going to tolerate this anymore. And I think we're going to see a lot of action as far as Iran is concerned. And America is not just going to stand by and let them get a nuclear weapon. I think that's the big elephant in the room, because, it's the head of the snake, to use a phrase. Without Iran, so many of the problems in the Middle East would be addressed, not all of them, but many of them. And unless Iran is dealt with by a strong president, and I think we have that at the moment in the White House as far as foreign policy is concerned, we're talking about all the symptoms all the time.
Absolutely. And Sharon, tell us about the article and proposal that you wrote a year ago, which is also very, very similar to the proposal that Donald Trump is making, because rightly so. He's saying, how can you possibly rebuild Gaza, because Gaza is in a complete mess? And the best thing would be to temporarily transfer the residents of Gaza into neighbouring Egypt and to Syria, and then to rebuild Gaza that would then be actually free of Hamas. But the interesting fact is that he wants America to rebuild Gaza and no other nation.
Well, I think he said he was going to draw on other nations.
Yeah, but ultimately,
America will steer it.
America will steer it.
Yeah.
America will then help build the infrastructure and the housing that was destroyed because of Hamas's actions on October the 7th.
Yeah, I don't think he wants to keep it for himself, as he said, I will, but I don't think that's right. He said that the wealthy countries around the world who will join in on this, but I think he will guide which countries are there to make sure that they don't rebuild another terrorist state. You know that I agree with his policy that the people of Gaza have to be moved out of Gaza. There are two emotions that are involved here. The one is that on October the 7th, you had to take a choice. You're either with Israel, with the Jews, or you're with the monsters. And the whole of Gaza is propagandized, it's radicalized, including the children. So something has to be done with them. These are human beings as well, so we can't just say get rid of them, move them on. They're human beings that have to be taken care of. The best way to take care of them is to cross them across the border at the Philadelphia corridor, move them into northern Sinai, cordon it off so that they stay there and they are de-radicalized there. There has to be a program of de-radicalization.
De-Hamasification.
Well, yes, to make sure that they do not go out into the greater world and start creating terror, but also so they don't go back into that lifestyle where they live in poverty and that they want to fight and to blame everybody else for their bad choices. So we need to give them a normalization program that they can build as human beings and be proper, positive human beings as part of society. People are decrying this, calling it population movement, but we know that populations have been moved in the past. When somebody attacks a country and they lose that war, they need to take the consequences. The consequences are, for instance, if I go back to my South African background, when the Transvaal and the Orange Free State invaded Natal and the Cape before 1910, I think it was 1902, or somewhere near there, and the British were there, they lost. And therefore they were incorporated into what became the Union of South Africa and what is now the Republic of South Africa. And nobody talks about the free states of Orange Free State and the Free State of Transvaal and having rights of people to govern themselves. And the same applies to these Gazans. They have given up the right to govern themselves, and they need to understand that their population has to be moved for their own security and safety as much as the safety of the world. And it's the nature of war that the loser has to accept his fate when he makes those decisions to invade another country.
No, absolutely. So let's have CBN's perspective on the future of Gaza and particularly post-conflict Gaza to deal with the reconstruction and how to rebuild Gaza free of Hamas's terror influence so they don't build up a terrorist infrastructure and carry out another October the 7th style attack in a decade or decade and a half's time.
During his meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu in the Oval Office this week, President Trump unveiled his historic vision for the future of Gaza.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site. Do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years. We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East. This could be so magnificent. But more importantly than that is the people that have been absolutely destroyed that live there now can live in peace in a much better situation because they're living in hell.
Gaza has been devastated. It's now a wasteland that will require hundreds of billions of dollars and years to reconstruct. Already, people around the world are criticizing Trump's idea. They ask, why should the Palestinians want to leave their homes? It's racist. American troops would come under attack from the few terrorists remaining in Gaza. However, Trump is thinking outside the box, envisioning a better future for the Palestinians and the Middle East. The United States cannot do this alone. Transforming Gaza and the region will require bold leaders with vision, similar to the late presidents of Israel and Egypt, Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat. It will also need investment and involvement from regional leaders in Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Jordan, Qatar, and Egypt. Trump's proposal should be seen as a starting point for negotiations. Too many generations of Arabs and Jews have suffered from ongoing war and violence. Instead of dismissing the idea with skepticism, let's look to God to use peacemakers to turn what seems impossible into a reality.
Yeah, and why not? It's imperative to think outside the box. And of course, the international community want to go back to the failed policies of the past to rebuild Gaza with so much of our Western our taxes to fund the reconstruction of Gaza that only goes to building Hamas's terror infrastructure so they can carry out more attacks. The people of Gaza deserve a better future and they deserve to be free of Hamas. Share with us your thoughts on these bold ideas that Donald Trump has to kind of rebuild Gaza and kind of essentially rid it of Hamas?
Well, I would agree that the old patterns of thinking have not worked. We need new ideas. I'm not confident that transferring a whole population is workable for a number of reasons, permanently transferring them, that is, for a number of reasons. One is it's going to come under inevitable challenges from either of the two international courts, even though America is a member of neither of those courts. That is inevitable. But the question of actually rebuilding Gaza, well, it's going to take 15, 20 years. No one can live there at the moment. So I'm sure the United Nations will come up with their own plans, and whether those plans are agreeable to Netanyahu and Trump remains to be seen. But the old way of governing Gaza by Hamas is simply not an option. And as for the denazification or the de-Hamasification that you called this earlier, I think that needs to be pursued, but how that's going to work, I don't know, because with the denazification of Germany and the de-radicalization of Japan, that was a very different context. It didn't involve extremist religion. So I don't know if it's going to work in this context. Very difficult to use one example and apply it to a different context in history.
Yeah, but I mean, we only got 2 minutes left, and this is a whole new argument that we're bringing to the table. Surely with the reconstruction of Gaza within 30 seconds, that the people of Gaza need a new education system and a new media that doesn't exalt and honour jihadi terrorists and martyrs who have carried out suicide bombing attacks in Israel and against Westerners.
I think you're right about religion and nationality in changing ideologies. The discussion is whether Islam's an ideology or a religion, and for another time. They have to be de-radicalized, and you start with the children. The adults are lost. So you take the children, you create an idea of a kibbutz in northern Sinai, where the children are in children's homes, where they're taught about nursery rhymes and songs and how to be happy. That's the first thing. The second thing, Gaza should be an international heritage site. It should be nobody's land, and everybody should have access to it.
Sharon and Robert, thank you for being outstanding guests for today on the Middle East Report. I want to thank you for watching this programme at home. We can only wait and pray to see what happens if those remaining hostages are not released on Saturday at 12 p.m. And we pray that they would come home. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.